welcome to the channel.
I never thought I'd end up here, but I need some advice and maybe just a space to vent. My name's Frederick, and I live in a small town up in Scandinavia. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else, or so I thought. Life here has always been simple, predictable even. I work as an advertising agent, pretty well known in the region, and in my younger days, I used to race rally cars. I like to think I've had a decent life. My wife, Emma, is a nurse, and we have a son together, Oliver. For years, I thought we had something solid. Sure, life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Then Ralph Eriksson moved into town, and everything started to fall apart. Ralph was this big-shot businessman who oozed charm and had money to burn. He claimed he wanted to give back to the community and started a historical society focused on local culture and theatrical reenactments. Sounds innocent, right? At first, Emma was skeptical of Ralph, just like I was. But after a while, her curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to join his group. She said it'd be a good way to connect with people outside of the hospital, maybe try something new. I didn't think much of it. If anything, I thought it might be good for her to have a hobby. Little did I know, Ralph's historical society wasn't about history, it was a breeding ground for scandals. Emma started spending more and more time at the society. Rehearsals, meetings, late-night cast gatherings. Her schedule became consumed by it. It wasn't long before rumors started flying around town. People whispered about affairs and shady dealings within Ralph's circle, but Emma brushed it off as small-town gossip. She insisted everything was above board and said I was being paranoid. Then there was Ronnie. I've known Ronnie for years. He's an old rival from my rally racing days. We've always been civil, but there's never been any love lost between us. Ronnie joined the society shortly after Emma, and suddenly, they were spending more time together. She'd mention him casually in conversations, but something about it felt off. When I asked, she laughed and said, "Don't be ridiculous. He's just a friend." But I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. One night, I came home late from work. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of Emma's laptop in the living room. She didn't hear me come in, and when I walked over, I saw her chatting in some group thread. I caught Ronnie's name before she quickly closed the screen. "What are you up to?" I asked. "Just theater stuff," she replied without looking up. I let it slide, but from that moment on, I started paying closer attention. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Emma's behavior was different. She was always glued to her phone, laughing at messages she wouldn't share with me. When I'd ask about the historical society, she'd either wave it off or give vague answers like, "Oh, just planning for the next performance." It felt like she was trying to keep me out of that part of her life, and that wasn't like her, or at least the her I thought I knew. One evening, I decided to drop by one of their rehearsals unannounced. It seemed innocent enough. I was just a husband curious about what his wife had been up to. The moment I stepped into the old community hall where they practiced, the atmosphere felt strange. It wasn't just the dim lighting or the way people hushed as I walked in, it was Ralph. He was standing near Emma, holding a prop sword, laughing loudly at something she'd said. When he spotted me, his smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes flickered. It was the kind of look you get when you're caught red-handed, but you're too slick to show it. "Frederick, welcome," he boomed, striding toward me with his hand outstretched. "Your wife is an absolute star here. She's got quite the talent for the stage." Emma gave me a tight smile, like she wished I wasn't there. I played along, shaking his hand and pretending everything was fine. "Just wanted to see the magic you all are working on," I said, keeping my tone casual. But as I stood there, watching the group run through their lines, I couldn't help but notice how Ralph kept finding excuses to be near Emma. Whether it was adjusting her posture or whispering stage directions, it was clear he enjoyed her company a little too much. And then there was Ronnie, leaning against the back wall, watching them like a hawk. His eyes followed Emma, and there was no mistaking the way he looked at her. On the way home, I brought it up. "Seems like Ralph's a bit of a character," I said, testing the waters. Emma sighed. "Don't start, Frederick. He's harmless. He's just passionate about the society." "And Ronnie? He seems pretty passionate too." She rolled her eyes. "You're reading too much into things. Ronnie's just Ronnie. You've always had a problem with him." That part was true. But it didn't explain why my wife, who used to tell me everything, was now so defensive and secretive. The following week, I started hearing more rumors. A friend of mine from the advertising agency, Lars, mentioned that Ralph's society wasn't exactly the wholesome community project it pretended to be. They're calling it a cult, Lars said over lunch. Apparently, Ralph's got this inner circle he calls 1648. Only certain people get invited to the real parties, if you catch my drift. I didn't catch his drift, not fully, so I pressed him. That's when Lars told me about the initiation rumors. The talk around town was that Ralph's parties involved more than just drinks and costumes. There were whispers about women being pressured into things, about auditions that went beyond acting. I felt sick. You think Emma's part of this? Whatever it is? Lars shrugged, lowering his voice. All I know is, Ralph's a smooth operator. Guys like him? They don't care who they hurt, as long as they get what they want. That night, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. When Emma got home from another late rehearsal, I confronted her. What exactly is this 1648 thing I keep hearing about? I asked, crossing my arms. Her face went pale for a split second before she laughed it off. Oh, come on, Frederick. That's just a silly name Ralph came up with for his closest friends in the society. It's nothing serious. Nothing serious? Then why all the secrecy? She looked annoyed now, like I was ruining her fun. Because people like Lars love to gossip and blow things out of proportion. You're letting rumors get into your head. But the way she avoided my eyes told me there was more to the story. I didn't press her that night, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. Something was going on, I was sure of it now. If Emma wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd have to find it myself. The next morning, I started digging. I reached out to a guy I used to know from my rally days, Henrik. Back then, Henrik was a private investigator who occasionally moonlighted as a mechanic. We'd kept in touch over the years, so I figured he'd know how to help. Ralph Eriksson? Henrik repeated over the phone. Yeah, I've heard the name. Rich guy, right? Moves around a lot. Always leaves behind some kind of mess. That was all the confirmation I needed to hire him. I asked him to look into Ralph and his so-called society. Henrik didn't hesitate, agreeing to start right away. Give me a week, he said. I'll dig up what I can. In the meantime, I started keeping a closer eye on Emma. It wasn't hard to notice the changes once I paid attention. She'd started wearing more makeup, even on her days off. Her wardrobe had shifted too, more dresses, less of the casual nurse scrubs she used to live in. And then there were the constant texts, the late nights at rehearsals, and the way she avoided looking me in the eye when I asked simple questions. One evening, I decided to check her phone. I hated the idea. I've always believed in trust, but things had gone too far. She'd left it charging on the kitchen counter while she showered. I hesitated for a moment before unlocking it. There was a group chat titled 1648. My stomach dropped. Most of the messages were harmless. Jokes, updates about the society's events, reminders for rehearsals. But then I saw something from Ralph. Big night Friday. Emma, looking forward to seeing you in the white dress. Ronnie says you wear it well. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. It wasn't outright proof of anything, but it was enough to light a fire under my suspicions. I locked the phone and put it back before she could catch me. That Friday, I decided to follow her. Emma had mentioned another important rehearsal, and she dressed up like she was going to a gala, not a dusty community hall. When she left, I waited a few minutes, then grabbed my coat and keys and followed at a distance. She didn't head to the hall. Instead, she drove to Ralph's mansion on the edge of town. Ralph's place was enormous, more like a castle than a house. Warm lights glowed from the windows, and expensive cars were lined up along the driveway. I parked down the street, my heart pounding, and watched as Emma walked to the front door. Ralph opened it himself, greeting her with a kiss on the cheek. I stayed there for hours, parked in the shadows, watching people come and go. There was music, laughter, and at one point, someone stumbled out onto the lawn looking disheveled and embarrassed. Whatever was happening inside wasn't a rehearsal. When Emma finally left around midnight, she didn't look like someone who'd been acting on a stage. Her makeup was smudged, her hair was a mess, and she had a faraway look in her eyes. I followed her home, my mind racing. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't stop replaying everything I'd seen. Emma walking into Ralph's mansion, the way she looked when she came out, it all pointed to something I didn't want to believe. When she slipped into bed beside me, she smelled faintly of Ralph's cologne. I clenched my fists under the blanket, willing myself to stay calm. The next morning, Emma acted like everything was normal. She made breakfast, laughed at Oliver's jokes, and chatted about mundane things like the weather. But all I could see was Ralph's hand on her shoulder, the way she let him kiss her cheek. I didn't bring it up right away. Instead, I called Henrik to see if he'd found anything. "Fredrik," he said, his tone grim, "you're not going to like this." Henrik had uncovered quite a bit. Ralph Eriksson wasn't just a wealthy businessman with a passion for history. He had a trail of controversies behind him. In his previous town, a similar historical society had collapsed under allegations of fraud, sexual misconduct, and manipulation. Several women had come forward, claiming Ralph had coerced them into compromising situations under the guise of initiations. And then there was the group he called 1648. According to Henrik, it wasn't just a nickname for his closest friends, it was a secretive club with its own set of rules. Membership required loyalty, and loyalty often meant crossing boundaries. "Do you think Emma's involved in any of this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I can't say for sure," Henrik replied. "But if she's attending those private gatherings, there's a good chance she's in deeper than she realizes." I hung up, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. I needed to confront Emma, but I didn't want to go in blind. So I decided to gather more evidence. That week, I kept my distance, pretending to be busy with work. Emma, meanwhile, grew more distant too, spending even more time at the society. One night, when she said she'd be working late on props, I decided to check her laptop again. This time, I hit the jackpot. In her email, I found an invitation from Ralph titled, "Special Evening, Members Only." The event was scheduled for the coming Friday, at his mansion. The message was cryptic but unsettling. "This is an exclusive gathering for the truly devoted. Wear white. Be prepared to take the next step." I didn't know what the next step meant, but I knew it wasn't good. The days leading up to the event were excruciating. I tried to act normal around Emma, but every time I looked at her, I felt a mix of anger and heartbreak. She was lying to me, I was sure of it now. But part of me still wanted to believe there was an explanation, that maybe I was blowing things out of proportion. Friday came too quickly. Emma dressed in a flowing white dress that made her look like a bride. When I asked where she was going, she gave the same rehearsed line, "Rehearsal. Big show coming up soon." "I don't believe you," I said bluntly. She froze, her hand on the doorknob. "Fredrik, don't start." "Don't start? You've been lying to me for weeks, Emma. I know you're not going to a rehearsal." Her face hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then prove me wrong," I challenged. "Show me where you're going. Let me come with you." She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the door. It's not something you'd enjoy. Try me." Emma sighed, exasperated. "This is why I didn't tell you. You always have to control everything. I need something for myself, Fredrik. Something that's not about you." Her words stung, but I didn't back down. "If you walk out that door, Emma, I'm going to find out the truth. One way or another." She didn't say anything. She just grabbed her purse and left. The moment Emma left, I grabbed my jacket and keys. I wasn't going to sit around wondering anymore, I had to see for myself. I followed her car at a distance, careful not to get too close. Sure enough, she headed straight for Ralph's mansion again. The driveway was lined with cars, even more than last time. Some people milled around outside, all dressed in white, laughing and holding drinks. I parked farther down the road and made my way closer on foot, staying in the shadows. Through one of the large windows, I could see into the main room. Ralph stood at the center of the gathering, commanding attention as he raised a glass. Emma was right beside him, smiling like she belonged there. Ronnie hovered nearby, his eyes fixed on her. I couldn't hear what Ralph was saying, but I saw him motion toward a doorway at the back of the room. A small group, including Emma, followed him through it. My chest tightened. Whatever was happening back there, it wasn't just theater. I crept around the side of the house, trying to find a better angle. The music from inside drowned out the sound of my footsteps, but I still felt like every movement I made was too loud. Finally, I found a window that looked into the back room. What I saw made my stomach churn. Ralph was standing in the center, speaking to the group with a charismatic grin. He handed each person a glass of something dark and motioned for them to drink. Emma hesitated for a moment before raising hers to her lips. I couldn't watch anymore. I turned and left, anger and betrayal coursing through me. The drive home felt like a blur. My head was pounding, and my heart raced with questions I didn't want to answer. What was Emma drinking? What was that group doing in Ralph's mansion? And why did she look so comfortable in the middle of it all? I barely slept that night. When Emma came home around 2 a.m., I pretended to be asleep, though my mind was anything but calm. She tiptoed around the bedroom, quietly changing and slipping into bed like she hadn't just come back from something sinister. The next morning, Emma acted as though nothing had happened. She hummed while making coffee and chatted with Oliver about his weekend plans. I couldn't take it anymore. "What's really going on, Emma?" I blurted out as we sat at the breakfast table. She glanced at me, her expression calm but guarded. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean," I said, my voice firmer. "I know you weren't at a rehearsal last night. I followed you." Her face froze for a moment before she quickly recovered. "You followed me? Frederick, that's invasive." "Invasive? You're the one sneaking off to God knows what at Ralph's mansion," I shot back. "What was that little backroom gathering? What were you drinking?" Emma's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's just a private meeting for people more involved in the society. It's nothing sinister. Don't lie to me." I snapped. "I saw the way Ralph looks at you. I saw Ronnie lurking around. And don't even get me started on the rumors about 1648. Her eyes widened, and she stepped back. "You've been listening to town gossip? That's your big evidence." "I'm not stupid, Emma," I said coldly. "Whatever you're doing with those people, it's not innocent. And if you think I'm going to just sit here while you destroy our family..." She cut me off. "Destroy our family? Don't be so dramatic, Frederick. You're letting your paranoia ruin us, not me." I stared at her, shocked by her defiance. The woman I married, the one who used to laugh with me on lazy Sunday mornings, who cried with joy when Oliver was born, was now standing in front of me like a stranger. "You need to choose," I said quietly, but my voice was firm. "Ralph and his society, or this family." Emma's expression faltered for the briefest moment, but then she steeled herself. "You're being unfair," she muttered, grabbing her keys. "I need to clear my head." And just like that, she walked out the door. After Emma stormed out, the house felt eerily quiet. Oliver was in his room, oblivious to the tension, but I felt the walls closing in. I needed answers, and waiting for Emma to clear her head wasn't going to cut it. I called Henrik again, desperate for any updates. "Frederick, you're not going to like this," he began, which seemed to be his go-to phrase lately. "What now?" I asked, gripping the phone tightly. "Ralph's been using that society to do more than host plays and parties," he said. "I've spoken to a couple of people from his previous town. They mentioned that Ralph's inner circle often involved, let's call them power games, coercion, manipulation, and not just with the women." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Ralph has a way of making people prove their loyalty. For some, it's financial contributions or favors. For others, it's personal." The word hung in the air like a weight. "Emma." I croaked out. "I don't have direct proof she's been pulled in, but if she's going to those private meetings, she's likely on his radar," Henrik replied. My hands shook as I ended the call. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and every step brought me closer to the truth I didn't want to face. Later that day, Emma came home. She looked calmer, but there was still a guarded edge to her. "Can we talk?" she asked softly, setting her purse down. "Depends," I said, crossing my arms. "Are you ready to be honest with me?" She hesitated, then sat down across from me. "Frederick, I know how this looks. But Ralph's society isn't what you think it is. It's just a way for me to feel like I'm part of something. I needed a break from the routine, from me." I interrupted. She winced. "That's not what I mean. I just wanted something different. Something that's mine." I stared at her, trying to read between the lines. "And Ronnie? Where does he fit into this something different?" Her face hardened again. "You're obsessed with Ronnie. He's nothing but a colleague in this group. You're making him into something he's not." "I don't trust him," I said bluntly. "And I definitely don't trust Ralph." Emma sighed, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "You don't have to trust them. You just need to trust me." But that was the problem. I didn't. Not anymore. Before I could respond, Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, and her face paled slightly. "Who's that?" I asked, my voice low. "Just Ralph. He's confirming the next meeting," she said quickly, reaching for the phone. "Let me see," I demanded, my hand shooting out to stop her. "Frederick, don't," she protested, but I was faster. I snatched the phone and scrolled to the message. It wasn't just a confirmation, it was another cryptic invitation. "Emma, don't forget, tomorrow night is for the true believers. Trust is everything. Let's see if you're ready." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. "What is this, Emma? What are you getting into?" She stood, her face a mixture of panic and anger. "It's nothing. You're reading too much into it. You always do." "No," I said firmly, holding up the phone. "You need to tell me what this is. Because if you don't, I'm going to show this to someone who can figure it out." Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. She just turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the message. The silence after Emma walked away was unbearable. I sat there with her phone in my hand, staring at Ralph's message. "True believers. Trust is everything." It sounded like some kind of initiation, and the thought of Emma being involved made my stomach churn. That night, I couldn't bring myself to confront her again. She stayed locked in the bedroom, leaving me to pace the living room, the message burning in my mind. I couldn't decide what hurt more, her refusal to open up or the possibility that she was in deeper than I feared. The next day, I decided I couldn't sit on this any longer. I called Henrik again, explaining what I'd found. "That sounds like one of Ralph's games," Henrik said. "He thrives on secrecy and control. If Emma's being invited to something exclusive, it's because Ralph wants to see how far she'll go. You might not like what that means." "What do I do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Keep your cool. Don't let her know you're onto her yet. I'll see what I can dig up about this True Believers event. Whatever you do, don't confront Ralph directly. He's got a way of turning things on people, making them look crazy." I hung up, feeling no closer to a solution. That evening, Emma was unusually quiet, her eyes darting around like she was avoiding something, or someone. Oliver noticed too. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked over dinner. Emma smiled tightly. "Of course, sweetheart. Just tired from work." I watched her, trying to gauge if she felt guilty or just trapped. Later, when Oliver was asleep, I decided to make one last attempt to get through to her. I knocked on the bedroom door, where she'd retreated again. "Emma, we need to talk," I said through the door. "I'm tired, Frederick," she replied, her voice muffled. "Too tired to save this marriage?" I shot back. The door opened slowly, and Emma stood there, her face pale and drawn. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth," I said. "About Ralph. About the society. About this True Believers nonsense. Are you seriously going to stand there and tell me it's innocent?" Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought I'd finally broken through. But then she straightened, her jaw tightening. "It's just a party, Frederick. That's all it is. A party." I repeated, disbelief dripping from my voice. "You expect me to believe that?" "It's nothing you need to worry about," she said, brushing past me. "You're lying," I said, my voice rising. "You've been lying for weeks, Emma. Do you even care what this is doing to us? To Oliver?" She turned, her eyes flashing with anger. "Don't bring Oliver into this. You're the one turning this into a circus, not me." I stared at her, my heart pounding. "If you walk out tomorrow night and go to that event, you're making a choice. Don't come back and tell me you didn't know what you were doing." For a moment, I thought she might say something, apologize, explain anything, but instead, she walked back into the bedroom and closed the door. The next day, Emma acted as if our argument hadn't happened. She moved through the house with a strange calmness, preparing meals and chatting with Oliver as if everything was perfectly normal. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided my eyes. By the evening, the air between us was taut like a bowstring. When she started getting ready, my chest tightened. She slipped into another white dress, this one even more elegant than the last. Her makeup was flawless, her hair carefully styled. It looked like she was heading to a wedding, not some secret gathering. As she put on her coat, I stood in the doorway, blocking her exit. "This is it, Emma," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "You walk out that door, and you're walking out on us." She froze for a moment, her hand on the doorknob. "Frederick, you're being ridiculous. It's just one night." "It's not just one night," I snapped. "This is a choice. You're choosing them over your family." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't look at me. "I'll be back later," she said quietly and walked past me. As the door closed behind her, something inside me broke. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the empty space where she'd been. I didn't wait long before grabbing my keys. If she thought I was going to let this slide, she was wrong. The road to Ralph's mansion was dark, lined with trees that seemed to press in from both sides. When I arrived, the house was lit up like a festival, music and laughter spilling out into the night. I parked in the shadows again, but this time I didn't just watch from a distance. I slipped around the side of the house, keeping to the darkened edges. Inside, the scene was decadent, men and women in white, sipping drinks and laughing as if they didn't have a care in the world. But I wasn't here to admire the spectacle. Through the window, I saw Emma. She was standing next to Ralph, who was holding court like a king. He leaned close to her, whispering something that made her laugh, a laugh I hadn't heard in weeks. My stomach twisted. Then Ralph gestured toward another doorway, and the same group from before began moving toward it. Emma followed without hesitation. I crept around to the back of the house, where I found a side door slightly ajar. Slipping inside, I kept to the shadows, my heart pounding. The hallway led to a dimly lit staircase, where muffled voices echoed from below. I didn't hesitate. The basement was set up like a private lounge, with low lighting and an air of exclusivity. A group of about 10 people stood in a circle, glasses in hand. Ralph was at the center, his arms spread wide like a preacher addressing his flock. "This," he declared, "is where trust begins. Tonight, we take the next step in binding ourselves to one another. No judgment, no limits, only loyalty." My fists clenched at his words. I scanned the room until my eyes landed on Emma. She looked nervous, clutching her glass tightly, but she didn't step back. Ralph approached her, his voice dropping to a softer, more intimate tone. "Emma, are you ready to show your commitment?" She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room. For a moment, I thought she might refuse. And then she nodded. My vision blurred with rage. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Emma!" I shouted, stepping into the light. The room froze. Every head turned toward me, but I only had eyes for her. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Her face went pale. "Frederick? What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I shot back. "What is this? Some kind of cult?" Ralph stepped forward, his expression calm but calculating. "Frederick, this is a private event. I'm afraid you're not welcome here." "Like hell I'm not," I snarled. "You've been manipulating my wife, dragging her into whatever twisted game this is. It ends now." Ralph smirked. "Your wife is here of her own free will. Maybe you should ask her what she truly wants." I turned to Emma, my chest heaving. "Is this what you want?" I asked, my voice raw. "To be part of this? To let this man control you?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't speak. The silence was deafening. "Emma," I said, my voice breaking. "If you walk out of here with me, we can fix this. But if you stay..." She looked at me, then at Ralph, her face torn. And then, to my relief, she stepped toward me. Emma followed me out without a word. The quiet between us was heavy as we walked to the car. I glanced back toward Ralph's mansion, half expecting someone to stop us, but no one did. The drive home was tense. Emma stared out the window, her face pale and expressionless. I wanted to say something, to demand answers, but I didn't trust myself to stay calm. When we got home, she finally spoke. "You shouldn't have come there." I slammed the car door and turned to her. "You shouldn't have been there in the first place. What were you thinking, Emma?" Her jaw tightened, but her voice was shaky. "It's not what you think. Ralph isn't some villain. He's helping people, helping me, helping you." I repeated, incredulous. "By dragging you into some secret group and testing your loyalty with whatever that was?" She didn't respond, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. We went inside, and Oliver was already asleep. In the living room, Emma finally broke down. "I just wanted to feel like myself again," she admitted, her voice cracking. "After years of work, stress, everything, I felt like I was disappearing. Ralph made me feel seen. I wanted to be angry, to yell, but seeing her so vulnerable cut through my rage. And me? What about our family? She wiped her eyes. I know I made a mistake, Frederick. But I didn't. I didn't do anything unforgivable. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure I believed her, or if I even wanted to. The next morning, Emma avoided me. She stayed in the kitchen, cleaning dishes that didn't need washing, while I sat in the living room, trying to piece together my next move. The tension was unbearable, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. Around midday, Henrik called. Frederick, I've got something you need to see. I met him at a small cafe on the edge of town. Henrik handed me a folder filled with photos and documents. These are from Ralph's previous ventures. His societies have always ended the same way: exposed scandals, ruined lives, broken marriages. He uses people, pits them against each other, and then moves on. The photos showed women and men in compromising situations, some of them tearfully recounting their experiences in court. The pattern was clear. Ralph would charm people, lure them in with promises of belonging and purpose, then manipulate them into doing whatever served his interests. Henrik flipped to the last page. Ralph doesn't just play games. He has connections, legal teams, and a lot of money to bury anyone who comes after him. If you're going to take him on, you'll need to be smart about it. I stared at the folder, anger bubbling inside me. I don't care how powerful he is. He's not destroying my family. When I got home, Emma was waiting for me. Her face was pale, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I need to tell you something, she said quietly. Go ahead, I said, dropping the folder on the table between us. But you should know, I already know more than you think. Her eyes flicked to the folder, then back to me. She took a deep breath. Ralph. He asked me to join 1648. Last night was supposed to be my initiation. The words hit me like a punch. Initiation. I repeated. What does that mean, Emma? Tears filled her eyes. Nothing happened, I swear. But Ralph wanted me to prove my loyalty. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up. I felt a surge of relief and rage at the same time. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? I was scared, she admitted, her voice shaking. Scared you'd leave me. Scared I'd already gone too far. You should have been scared of what this would do to our family, I snapped, unable to hold back. Her tears spilled over, but she didn't defend herself. For the first time in weeks, it felt like the walls between us were cracking. We're going to fix this, I said firmly. But Ralph is going down. Over the next few days, Emma and I barely spoke, but something had shifted. She was quieter, almost subdued, and I could see the weight of guilt pulling her down. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I also couldn't ignore the faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what Ralph had almost destroyed. Henrik and I worked in the background, planning our next move. If Ralph's past proved anything, it was that he relied on secrecy and manipulation to stay untouchable. To expose him, we needed undeniable proof of what he was doing. Emma needs to play along, Henrik said one night as we reviewed our plan. I hesitated. She's been through enough. Henrik raised an eyebrow. She's already in Ralph's circle. If she can get us access to one of his meetings or dig up internal documents, we can take him down for good. But it has to come from the inside. When I brought the idea to Emma, she was horrified. You want me to go back to him? She asked, her voice trembling. Not go back, I clarified. Just get close enough to get evidence. Emails, documents, anything we can use. I don't know if I can do that, Frederick, she whispered. I leaned forward, my voice firm. This is our chance to stop him from doing this to anyone else. To end this once and for all. I need to know you're with me on this. She stared at me for a long moment before nodding. Okay, I'll do it. The next week, Emma reconnected with Ralph, claiming she wanted to return to the society and make amends for leaving abruptly. He welcomed her back with open arms, clearly eager to pull her deeper into his web. She played her part well, attending rehearsals and meetings while discreetly gathering information. Meanwhile, Henrik and I stayed close, ready to act at a moment's notice. Emma began forwarding emails and photos from Ralph's private chats to Henrik, who pieced together a damning timeline of his activities. One night, Emma came home visibly shaken. He's planning another initiation, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What kind of initiation? I asked, already dreading the answer. She shook her head. I don't know all the details, but it's happening this weekend. He told me I'm expected to attend, and I think he's going to push things further. I clenched my fists. You're not going. Emma looked at me, her eyes wide. If I don't, he'll know something's wrong. Frederick, this is our chance to catch him in the act. Henrik agreed. If she can record what happens, we'll have the proof we need to involve the authorities. Every instinct in me screamed to pull her out of this, to protect her, but I knew Emma was right. We needed to end this, and this initiation could be our shot. The plan was set. Emma would wear a hidden recorder to capture everything that happened during the meeting. Henrik and I would wait nearby, ready to intervene if things went south. As Emma left that night, I grabbed her hand. Be careful, I said, my voice rough. She nodded, her lips trembling. I will. I promise. Watching her walk out that door felt like the longest moment of my life. Emma arrived at Ralph's mansion just after sundown. She sent me a brief text. I'm in. I could only imagine the nerves she must have been feeling, but she didn't let it show. Ralph greeted her at the door with his usual charm, offering her a glass of wine as they stepped inside. Henrik and I sat in my car parked a few streets away, listening through the live feed from the recorder Emma wore. Every crackle and shift in the audio made my heart race. It's good to see you back, Emma, Ralph's voice purred through the speakers. I knew you were one of us. Emma responded calmly, her voice steady. I needed some time to clear my head, but I'm ready now. Good, Ralph said. Tonight's a special night. You're about to see the side of the society few are privileged to witness. Henrik nudged me. That's it. He's setting the stage for whatever's coming. Inside, the event unfolded much like the last one I'd seen. Guests mingled in their pristine white outfits, sipping drinks and laughing as if they were at a harmless party. But when Ralph clinked his glass, the room fell silent. Tonight, my friends, is a night of trust, Ralph announced. To belong here means more than just showing up. It means proving your loyalty, to me and to each other. He gestured toward the back door, and the group began to move. Emma followed, her breathing quickening slightly as she walked. Henrik and I listened intently, every step bringing her closer to the unknown. The group descended into the same basement I'd seen before, but this time, Ralph's tone was darker. He spoke about the importance of sacrifice, of letting go of boundaries to show true devotion. My stomach churned as I heard him mention the final step. What's he talking about? I whispered to Henrik. Power, he replied grimly. It's always about power. Ralph instructed the group to form a circle, and Emma's voice came through faintly. What's going to happen? You'll see, Ralph said smoothly. But first, a toast. To new beginnings. Henrik stiffened beside me. They're doing it now. We need to move. No, I said, my voice tight. Not yet. Let's wait until we have enough to bury him. Through the speakers, I heard Ralph approach Emma. His voice lowered, smooth and commanding. Are you ready, Emma? Yes, she said, though I could hear the slight tremble in her voice. Good, Ralph said. Then let's begin. Henrik nodded to me. We've got enough. Call it in. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, reporting the illegal activities happening at the mansion. Henrik and I jumped out of the car and sped toward the house, ready to pull Emma out if the police didn't arrive in time. As we approached the mansion, we saw flashing blue lights in the distance. The police had arrived. Guests were spilling out onto the lawn, some shouting, others trying to slip away unnoticed. Inside, chaos erupted. Ralph was shouting at the officers, denying any wrongdoing, while several guests stood frozen in shock. I scanned the room, my heart pounding, until I saw Emma standing to the side, her hands clenched at her sides. Emma! I called, rushing to her. She turned, her face pale but determined. Frederick, she said, her voice breaking. I pulled her into a tight hug. It's over. You're safe. Behind us, Ralph was being handcuffed, his confident facade finally cracking as the officers read him his rights. The room that had once been filled with his charisma and control was now a scene of his downfall. The aftermath of Ralph's arrest was a whirlwind. The police escorted Emma and several others out of the mansion for questioning. While most of the guests tried to distance themselves from Ralph's activities, Emma's cooperation made her a key witness. Her recordings, combined with Henrik's evidence, painted a damning picture of Ralph's manipulation and exploitation. Emma returned home late that night, looking exhausted but relieved. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling as she finally let the weight of the evening sink in. "It's over," she said, more to herself than to me. I nodded, though my emotions were far from settled. "You did the right thing." She looked up at me, her eyes full of regret. "I never should have let it go this far, Frederick. I don't know how to fix this, how to fix us." Her words hung in the air, heavy with uncertainty. Part of me wanted to lash out, to remind her of the betrayal, the lies. But the other part saw the cracks in her armor, the way guilt was already eating away at her. "We'll figure it out," I said finally, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. In the days that followed, Ralph's downfall became the talk of the town. News outlets picked up the story, detailing his long history of deceit and manipulation. More victims came forward, sharing how he had used his influence to control and exploit them. The historical society quickly dissolved, its members scattering in shame. Emma stayed home, avoiding the public eye. She focused on Oliver, trying to rebuild the trust she'd strained with her absence. But between us, the silence lingered. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I finally spoke. "Why did you stay with him for so long? Even when you knew something was wrong?" Emma looked down at her plate, struggling to find the words. "At first, it was harmless," she said quietly. "I thought it was just a fun distraction. But then Ralph, he knew how to make you feel like you needed him, like you'd lose everything if you didn't follow his rules. I was too scared to pull away, and too ashamed to tell you." Her voice cracked, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Frederick. I let him come between us, and I don't know if I can ever make it right." I didn't have an answer for her. Part of me wanted to forgive, to move on for the sake of our family. But the hurt was still fresh, and trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. In the weeks that followed, Emma made every effort to repair what had been broken. She stopped retreating into herself and opened up about everything, her feelings, her mistakes, and her commitment to making things right. It wasn't easy. There were days when anger and resentment threatened to drown us both. But there were also moments of hope, small tentative steps toward rebuilding the life we'd nearly lost. And Ralph? He faced a slew of charges, from fraud to coercion, with a long list of witnesses prepared to testify against him. His grip on our town was broken, and for the first time in months, it felt like we could finally breathe again. Months passed, and life slowly returned to a new normal. Ralph was gone, his trial making headlines as his web of manipulation unraveled in the courtroom. Emma's testimony, along with the evidence we'd gathered, played a critical role in ensuring he wouldn't hurt anyone else again. At home, things weren't perfect, but they were better. Emma worked hard to rebuild my trust, and I took small steps toward letting her back in. There were still scars, words left unspoken, moments of doubt, but there was also a shared determination to move forward. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching Oliver play in the yard, Emma reached for my hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For giving us a second chance." I looked at her, seeing the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "We're not there yet," I said honestly. "But we will be." She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope.
Bye.